Hello, Internet. Welcome to the first episode of Truth, Working Title, a series where I interview friends, acquaintances, and we just talk about life very candidly. For this first episode, we have my dear friend Susan. Susan and I met about 2 years ago through work, and we hit it off pretty much immediately. She's now become one of my very closest friends. In this episode, we talk about job negotiations, toxic masculinity, and quote unquote training your boyfriend, which is a meaty topic which we will explain. I hope you enjoy. Hi, Suchu.
Hi.
Thanks so much for doing this. I am so excited. I feel like we have really interesting conversations a lot. We've been talking on our BART rides home, and I feel like everyone listens to our conversations whenever we're talking on the BART. And you and I have actually joked about recording our conversations. So here we are. I'm so excited to be doing this. I cannot think of a better person to start off this series, so thank you.
Well, thank you for having me. I feel like we've been entertaining BART riders for at least 2 years now, so why not
Yes.
on the internet?
Yes, exactly. Okay, so I wanted to start us off with something very practical. You and I are in the same field, so we do talk about work a lot. And something we've done a fair amount of in the past 6 months or so is recruiting. And something that we talk about a lot is negotiating. And I feel like if I can speak for both of us, we're both relatively shy-ish, quiet-ish Asian girls, which makes the whole negotiating process really difficult. Um, so I wanted to know, what has your experience been like in the past year or so having these types of conversations?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think for me, it's really hard to negotiate on the phone. I'm not like an aggressive person, and I'm not good at thinking on my feet. I really have to play out the conversation in my head before I can even pick up the phone. So what I've tended to do in the past is try to keep it on email as much as possible. But you'll get recruiters will call you all the time for like one big thing just because it works faster for the workflow, and also they're people.
Mhm.
So there's like, why not hop on the phone and talk? Whereas I'm like, I don't want to get on the phone with you. Like, I'm scared. You're gonna cheat me out of my money. You're gonna get me to say yes, and then I'm gonna feel really crummy when I hang up. So I don't want that to happen. So I think the last time I had to, so the first time I can remember having to negotiate was 3 years ago when I was getting the job that I currently work at. And that recruiter kind of, I hadn't really had a lot of experience interviewing. So I knew that I had made it, but I didn't know that when he asked me, like, hey, can we hop on a quick phone call, that was going to be the offer call and that I was going to be expected to respond. And he told me the offer, and I was like, wow, that's great. But I was hoping for maybe something higher, because that's all I could say.
Uh-huh.
And he was like, well, last time you talked to us, you told us that as long as we could get somewhere close to this number, you were happy. You were going to be happy. And, full disclosure, during that phone call, when he asked me, it was like, I think probably the first phone call where he was like, what number are you thinking? And I was just like, close to this. And I hung up feeling really crummy after that, because I went to my coworker and I told her, and she was like, you should have asked for like 20K more. And that felt way beyond what I thought I was worth.
Yeah.
And I think after this time around, I've been interviewing a lot more. I've been able to, anytime I talk to a recruiter, I've been able to ask them, like, hey, what range are you guys thinking of paying for this role, so I could get an idea of how much the market was worth for my role. Whereas I didn't have that kind of information before, and I also had to get it. And that was the best way for me to get it, so that the next time, I had to negotiate with a recruiter, I felt more confident, since I knew that's what I was going to be going for somewhere else anyway. But back to the recruiter call. I think the last time I did this, I just tried to push for it. I tried to find any reason to help make it seem feel like, hey, I would have to move up to San Francisco for this. Like, if you could get any closer to this number, it would mean a lot.
Yeah.
Or can we maybe look elsewhere, like maybe it's a stock option or something, like anything else. And I found that if you ask once, usually recruiters have some kind of like budget allotted to typically increase your pay by some amount, maybe like 10%, 10-15% safe. And they'll almost always be like, okay, I'll see what I can do, and then come back with a slightly higher offer. So if you don't ask at all, come up with any reason like that you have to move, or that you got another offer from another company and it would be really great if they could make that offer or something like that, then just ask. Basically just ask, and they'll come up with something. And worst case scenario is they'll just say no, like, we really can't, we really stretched it on this one. And then it's up to you to decide if you feel like that offer was really fair.
Totally. I think when we were younger, we had so much more difficulty just asking for more, whether it be at the beginning, like on that first recruiter call, or when you have the offer. And I feel like what I've learned from our conversations is just ask, even if it's completely audacious, because I think both of us have gotten a lot more than what we expected doing that.
Yeah. I also think the other thing that has helped me was I was able to tell the recruiter, like, hey, if you can get me this, then I can sign ASAP. And more inclined, because they want to close on that deal, they want to close on you, the book. And if you can give them a method to get there, then they're more likely to be incentivized to do that for you.
Yeah. Something else I wanted to ask you about is another thing that I've learned from you is after, like, aside from negotiating just the straight up salary, are all of those other things, both in negotiation and like deciding whether or not you want to roll. I started a new role like 2 or 3 months ago, and I remember getting off a call from recruiters, and then you would ask me like, oh, did you ask X, Y, and Z? And I completely forget. I forget all the time to ask things like, how many PTO days do you get? Or like, if there are stock options, like if you can rattle off like a laundry list of what are some of those things that you ask recruiters once you have the offer to decide whether or not role is going to be good for you.
Yeah, I would say it's a really great question. I would say, really think about what you're interested in your next role. And at the time when you were interviewing, I was interviewing, we were best buds, like sitting next to each other and talking, debriefing on these calls. I think I was really focused on increasing my earning potential and finding a place that serves snacks, right? Like, so those are all really important questions to me. So I'm like, dude, did they have snacks? Because you gotta go where they have snacks.
So true. Right? Tour of the office is always good if you see the kitchen and there's snacks.
If you see the kitchen, you see the bathroom. Like, I've been at an interview where I was like, okay, I'm gonna go take a break, and I go to the bathroom and I'm like, wow, this bathroom's horrible. This faucet has been leaking for God knows how long. Like, I don't want to go to the bathroom every day here. Like, those are really little things.
Yeah.
Snacks, really little things. I think office tours were important because you get to see also like how they arrange their teams, where everybody sits, and maybe it's a good segue into asking, what the org structure is like if you haven't asked already. Like, who would you reporting into? What, those people are like. And then things like the really important questions to me at the time were like money, right? Stock benefits. Like, how am I going to be able to afford a house in the area? By joining a company that gave me a sweet, package on stocks that will eventually go public or, grow. So I'll like apply to companies where I really believe in the product. I feel like the earning potential is strong, and the package that I want to get as an employee matches up to that, right? Because if a company goes up, then I'm contributing to it and I should be benefiting from it. So I would encourage you to ask things like to the recruiter, like, what do the benefits look like at the company? What's the health insurance like? How many PTO days do you guys get? Do you guys get holiday shutdown?
That's a big one.
That's like 2 weeks vacation.
Yep.
People don't get it for free, right? And then, and then also like bonus package, is that usually a percentage of your annual salary? Is it, performance based? And also, how do you level up at the company? Like, what is the growth potential? Like, you get in there and you earn a lot, but can you grow more? Can you earn more at the company if you want to stay there long term? And I think it's important to me also that they have a good evaluation process so that I know what I can improve on and how to move up, right? So, and if they don't have those kinds of things, then maybe, like, for example, if it's a really early stage startup and they haven't figured that kind of stuff out, is there a place for you to contribute to that process?
Yeah. Wow, this is so great. I'm going to go back to this and like write these all down so that the next time I'm recruiting, I make sure that I check all these off. This is really good.
Yeah, get that money.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so I don't want to stick us to the work topic forever, so I'm going to transition us into the other frequent topic of conversation that we have, which is men. So we're both in long-term relationships, and I feel like we talk about our relationships pretty frequently. And one of the things that I wanted to talk about, because it's been top of mind for me for a while, is quote-unquote training our boyfriends. So before we get into the logistics, like, can you explain to the internet or whoever's watching or listening to this, like, what does that mean?
This is so funny because the moment you mentioned boys, I just had this funny image of, I think it was like posted on Instagram by like Overheard San Francisco or Overheard LA or something like that, where it was like someone was talking about how they're reading dog training.
Yes.
And how most of it can apply to relationships.
Oh my
gosh.
gosh.
I was like, oh, it makes sense. It's like, basic correlation. It's basic
So
psychology for living things.
So true.
How would I explain training with your boyfriends? I think what I struggled with early on, like getting into a relationship, was understanding that the other side just doesn't know. Like, you can't ask your dog to sit. I'm not trying to say that our boyfriends are dogs, but you can't ask a dog to sit if it's never been taught before. Like, you can't expect it to know what sit even means, right?
Yeah.
What are those words? How do you even spell it? Like, if it's never been explained, how do they know? And then it's like asking a dog to sit. They don't know it. And you getting angry. And then, right, like, everybody crashes and burns at that point.
Yep.
And so I guess the way that I've learned to deal with those situations is really, like, don't assume that they knew better, that they could have sat and they just decided not to sit just because you asked.
Totally.
And, be patient and be like, well, maybe they've never had to do this before.
Yeah.
And how do we help them, like, figure it out and help them understand how it makes you feel if they don't do something that you expect of them.
That's a beautiful explanation. That's so great. Yeah.
I can tell you a non-beautiful dog training explanation.
Go for it.
So, there's a lot of dog training, I guess, metaphors that could be used for this, but people who have had, like, dogs before or had to potty train a puppy, I've explained this to you, man. I was like, well, it's really hard to, basically, if a puppy, like, pees somewhere they're not supposed to, and a lot of people will yell at the puppy and think, they should have known better, or, like, push their nose into it or something, and they'll just have a negative correlation to it, right? And they won't do it again. That's the logic that we as humans will have. And they're right in that the puppy will have a negative correlation to it, but what tends to happen is that the puppy misunderstands. They think that they did something wrong because they peed, not because of where they peed. So the next time, if you do this enough, they'll end up peeing in like a secret place or like a private corner. And boy, that is not what you want, right? Because then you're gonna like walk into a room, you're gonna smell something, you don't know where it is. Is that what you want, right? Like, you don't want that in a relationship. You don't want them to like. You don't want to make them feel bad for doing something, and then have them tiptoe do next time, or feel like they were doing the wrong thing the wrong way. You know, you don't want them to misunderstand what your point really was. Yeah. So that was like the more crude example.
That's still that's a great example. That's a great example, I think. And I know before we started recording this, we were talking about our individual boyfriends' reactions to what we might say, but I feel like that's such a good explanation. And I think it's like a very non-offensive explanation. And I think like what I tend to say a lot, and we tend to say, I think, that just kind of puts all men or boys in a bucket is like, oh, like men are trash, or like boys are so stupid, they don't know anything. And I know I've said it in like, I've said that I say it in the nicest way, that I just assume their innocence, that like, oh, boys are stupid, they just don't know any better. But I like the puppy analogy because I think that makes it a little bit sweeter. So what are some of the things that you feel like you've trained someone on?
I think a common situation that you'll hear and see time and time again, manifested in different kinds of jokes, comics, you know, written pieces, is how household logistics pan out between two people. And what the roles and expectations are and how you set them. I think in the beginning, when we first started out, I don't think it was safe to assume that one person cooking meant that person was cooking for all. Like, if you're cooking, why don't you feed me too? Isn't that like
seems like common sense?
Huh?
Seems like common sense.
Seems like common sense, but maybe it's just common sense to me.
Yeah.
Because I think my family, or my roommates, or like my siblings, like that's just how it would operate, I imagine. But in our relationship, he'll be like cooking, and then he'll be like done. And I'd be like, well, you actually, you know, get fed by your company. My company doesn't actually have snacks, and that's why I was looking for it in the recruiting process. Yeah. But you know, like if you're cooking anyway, wouldn't it have been a nice thing for you to also make some, so that there'd be enough, so there'd be like leftovers, so I could take it to lunch today, while you're like fed by your company cafeteria, you know? Because I feel like if it were flipped, that's how I would conduct myself. Like that's what I would do. Yeah. And so it's just really frustrating to think like I wasn't thought of. Clearly he doesn't care about me. He doesn't care if I'm eating. Yeah. Did homemade food, and the fact that after he's done, I have to like slave the rest of my night away to make my lunch when he was just in the kitchen already. Why? Totally. And so it's like, if you think about it, it's a really awkward conversation to have, because you can't be like, well, why aren't you making me lunch? Yeah.
That is awkward.
It is really awkward. And our expectations are, you know, like the healthier way to go about this is to step back and realize our boundaries and expectations can differ between two people. It's going to take time for those two expectations to merge. I can say like now he's a lot more considerate in that way, where if he makes food, he'll make food for both of us. If I have food, it was a given that if I make food, I'm going to make food for the both of us. But I think that kind of example influenced him over time. Like, oh, hey, when she cooks for both of us.
It's funny. I'm like of two minds on the whole training thing, because I think like the generous side of me wants to say, like, yes, you cannot expect another human being to hold the same like values and behavior that you have, right? So for example, if you think that if somebody cooks, they should be cooking for everybody, like what you said, somebody might not have that behavior ingrained into their system, right? And so, yes, we should be generous and we should say, hey, this is just like how I would like to live my life, and it would be nice if you joined in on that value. But at the same time, like, I've obviously been in a relationship for a long time, and I think at some point it does get a little tiring to keep on teaching certain things, whether it's like repeating the same lesson, or it's just new things that you think should be a given.
Right.
I feel like at some point it does get a little tiring, and I think our frustration, or like women's frustration, is like, why can't men do better? Because I think a lot of what women value is quite similar. When we talk amongst our girlfriends, we say like, oh yes, I totally agree, he should have done X, even without like you or I saying that I was disappointed because he didn't do X, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Like, why is it that it seems like our expectations are so high and they all don't seem to be living up to it? Like, who put these expectations on us, and why were these boys trained so poorly?
Yes.
Like, what happened?
Yes.
Why were we taught to lower expectations, and why aren't they taught more things?
Yeah, exactly. It's like, it's a constant battle in my mind that I'm like, I just can't seem to bridge it. I don't know, because I don't think I've found, at least not very many examples of like men being, let's say, like as empathetic as women are, right? Like thinking before they act on something. And I don't know why that is. Like, I think it's a larger conversation of like, why is there that gap?
I think it's a societal thing. I don't think it's within our bound. The way men and women are traditionally brought up is very different, like 10, 20 years ago than it is now, or I hope so. I don't know. I would hope so. That, these grown adult boys in 10 years are going to be a lot more considerate and will think to like make lunch for the next day.
Yeah.
Yeah, but sometimes I do think about like, what makes this worth it? Why is this worth doing? Why do I have to spend my life to train this person so that I can have kids with them and hopefully stop training them so that I can train my kids?
Absolutely.
Why is that what is expected of me? Yeah, it's just certain, I guess, societal standards.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's totally frustrating. And I think, yeah, we as women have a job that we didn't sign up for, that we didn't know about, of like, if we want to have a good life, a good partnership in the future, you have to train your partner to be as good as you want him to be. Let's just assume heteronormative standards. But like, assuming we can't change the whole society, but let's say, like, let's play a scenario. I'm curious to hear like what you have to say about this. If there was like a software that you could upload, download, whatever the word is, into every guy so that he would just like intuitively know it, what would you put on there?
what I put on there, oh my god. Like, I think it's hard for men to take feedback, and it's hard for them to share how they feel.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily their fault.
Yeah.
It's another societal standard thing
For
that
sure.
kind of like dooms relationships to failure.
Yeah.
Well, I was just gonna say, I was like, well, the communication thing, like, you know that it is a close topic where, you know, like I was ranting to you early on in my relationship, like, hey, I thought I was sharing useful feedback, and this man just shut down. This grown-ass man just shut down in front of me, and I thought it was hurtful. I tried to put it in the least hurtful way, but he still shut down and shut me out, and I really didn't appreciate it. You know?
Yep. It's really tough. I think giving feedback in a relationship is really difficult. So I watch, you know, this YouTube channel called The School of Life. Their videos are so great, and there's definitely a common theme in some of their videos, especially about relationships, and they talk about treating your partner like a child. And they mean this, again, in like a very nice and generous way, but I think that's so true. And I think it's both for men and women, because I think when we're in a romantic relationship, we tend to revert to very childlike behaviors. So if Matt and I are talking and he's giving me feedback, I would also expect for him to be gentler with me than he would be, let's say, in a work setting, right? And vice versa. I'm a lot gentler with him than I would be in a work setting or giving feedback to anyone else. So I think in a relationship, that's somehow more important. And I think just tangent on the child thing as an example of how we revert to childlike behavior, like so many couples do like baby voice and whatnot, right? So that's why I think the child thing is really relevant.
That's a really interesting analogy. I've never heard of that before, actually, that we just go back to. But you know, if you think about a successful relationship, it is one where you fulfill each other's like basic needs, right? And when you have an issue with your significant other, your goal shouldn't be to try to hurt them or make them feel bad, right? That's like the last thing you want, even though you know that this feedback is going to be negative and it will hurt them a little bit. Like, what's the best way to share that with them? And you can only hope that your significant other has kept that in mind when you share it with them. So I'm like, dude, I'm not trying to hurt you. I'm just trying to tell you what's up. And if you're not trying to hear it, then how are you supposed to get better? I told you about how, you know, this is when I first discovered, I was like, oh, men's egos are so fragile. And this is, you know, it's not anyone's fault. It's just like, it's a societal thing. And women have to play dumb or tiptoe around it. And it's just really tiring. And there are some days where I just feel like, why do I have to live this way? Because I'm also a human being with a functioning brain and with two sets of eyes just like you, so shouldn't you be able to see what I'm seeing? But I remember explaining to you, like, oh, you know, like I told him what could be improved, and he took it really badly. And then you came back and you were like, hey, I saw this movie.
I knew it was going to be about that.
Are you cute? Of course you knew, because that's like a standout story. And like, I cannot believe that happened, and I cannot believe that it was successful. Like, I can't believe, I just can't believe that happened. Like, it's boggling to me. I find it hilarious, and I'm glad it worked out and made him feel better in his skin. You came back to me, you're like, hey, I saw this movie, and there's this scene where she is explaining to him exactly what you explained to your boyfriend. And he also took it badly at first, like, could not believe it, and then got over it, and things got better. And I was like, that's exactly what, except he hasn't gotten over it, and things have not gotten better. Right? And so maybe we should watch this movie. And I didn't tell him, like, why we're watching this movie. Well, first of all, this movie is like a rom-com, so it's like right up my alley. And I'm going to want to watch it, which is going to seem completely unsuspicious to him. So perfect undercover, like, plan here. But can you believe to watch a movie where the same situation was happening and then he happened to like be paying attention, and then he, the very next morning, this is like after a whole full night's of sleep, talks to me in the morning. He's like, hey, you remember that part of the movie? That was like us. And I was like, oh, really?
Really?
Yeah, what did you think about that?
So I'm gonna add some specificity. I'll explain what the movie is about, because honestly, I think that this is not a unique situation, and I think by sheer fact that there's a movie about it. I mean, the movie's not about it, but like there's a movie scene
about it.
Right? Like this is definitely not a unique situation, but essentially it's about this male and female protagonists that get stuck together because they're snowed in New York or wherever, and like they were going out on a date, they had a one night stand, and then she couldn't go back home because they were snowed in, and then eventually they got on each other's nerves, and they float this idea of like, hey, we're never going to see each other again. Why don't we tell each other everything that we didn't enjoy about each other sexually, and hopefully we'll improve for the future, right? And then she tells him, and before she does, she's like, I don't know if this is a good idea because you're not going to take it well because of male egos, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, no, go ahead. Like, I want to hear it. And of course, lo and behold, she tells him, and he's like, oh, I've never heard that before.
Right.
Like, he totally shuts down, and it's like, all right, you asked for this. But I think that's something that's totally relevant for many people. But on the larger topic of like showing an example or like leading by example, that's so like I relate it to representation, honestly. And this is like getting even bigger to like media representation and whatnot. But it's so much easier to recognize an issue or a solution when you see it in somebody else than to recognize it in yourself, which is why representation is so important.
Right. That's a really great point. I also think that, I mean, it's not easy to hear that kind of feedback as anybody, but especially as a man, because your identity is so strongly tied to doing well with women, at least like in the heterosexual world, like doing well with women. This is also equivalent to, I joked about this with you, I was like, that's something that you should never say to a man because it would like hurt him so badly, even whether or not he decides to show it to you. But also, if you say, it's like equivalent to telling him he's a bad driver. Never tell a man he's a bad driver. It would hurt him so badly, and he would never believe you anyway.
Yeah, so true. Yeah. And this is not like any individual guy's fault. It's just a societal thing, and it's so unfortunate that like certain tasks, like either whether it's doing well in bed or like driving or like I don't know, like handiwork or something, that all guys have to be good at it. And if you're not, then you're like less of a guy. Yeah. But I think some things are at least getting better. Like I think the driving thing, it's a good example, but I do think like that's changing a little bit. Especially if you live in like a city where like driving isn't a thing. Like that doesn't matter so much anymore.
It's true. I don't think I've ever dated anyone who's a better driver than me. Like,
right, I was gonna say. Like you're such a good driver.
Thank you. I think you're such a good driver too. You drive a lot. But I just think like, yeah, it's not. I've dated people who aren't good drivers, and it wasn't a big deal because they don't drive a lot or whatever. Like, yes, I kind of wish that they could like drive me around, or that I could trust them to like drive this distance or whatever.
Yeah.
But whatever.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing with like physical stuff, right? Like you either get better or you don't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Like I feel like it's all equal playing field, and there's no, like with any skill, whether it's like being good in bed or driving, like you have to work on it, right? So
Right.
there's no shame in being at whatever level you're at for that particular skill.
Yeah.
Um, and if it's not a skill that's like applicable in your life, like driving, then like who cares if you don't know how to drive?
Yeah.
Doesn't make you any less like manly or whatever. All
Yeah.
right. Well, I feel like this is a good stopping point for this first episode, but we'll definitely do more. I feel like we have so much to talk about, and as time continues, I'm sure we'll have more stories or more perspective to add to these topics.
For sure. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for doing this. This is so much fun.
Of course.
Okay, bye.